What, you have a podcast?
I want to talk to your brother. Start a podcast, right?
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets. I probably took a bullet to the head. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison.
Hello, friends and enemies, and welcome to another episode of Recovery from Politics Podcast. I am your host, Kyle Frame, and today is Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. Whew, I was hot last night. I really was. The personal little, thing before we get into it, it's kind of dumb, but, really, it's amazing that it's happened to me now twice in my life, which is kind of strange. So, way back when, Kyle Frame was a young 20-something in the United States Navy. And if you've been in the Navy, then you know all about tags and all the crap that goes along with them. So anyway, we have these danger tags, right? And that's when you want to work on a system that could potentially cause harm if somebody were to turn it on while you're working on it, right? It doesn't matter if this thing you're working on is 5 inches away from the on-off button. You still have to tag it. It is actually very useful when the thing you're working on is a huge interconnected system that goes all throughout the boat, right? So this totally makes sense. Go ahead, you tag it. And the whole tagging process is the first person who goes, he goes before the chief and he explains, hey, this is the system we want to work on. This is the work we're doing. This is why we need these specific things shut off. There are also special requirements if for some reason you want the system on while you do this hazardous work, especially when it deals with electricity. So, you go through this whole thing, you say, okay, we want these on. We obviously don't want them turned on while we're working on it, or we don't want this turned off while we're working on it, whatever the case may be. So the first person goes ahead and does that. They then go ahead and they hang the tags. These are actual physical red tags that they go and hang on the switch or valve or whatever it is that you want to say, hey, don't fucking touch this. So if somebody walks up and says, oh, I'm supposed to, they would see a very clear big red tag that has giant word danger on it, right? So they go ahead and do that. And then a second person goes in. They had nothing to do with the first person's work. This is intentional because you want somebody with a fresh set of eyes. They're still an expert on the equipment, but they weren't involved in the actual hanging of the tags. This is a second backup person to make sure everything works. The second person has nothing to do with the approval process, but they do have to be named to the chief. So the chief would ask, okay, you're the one telling me this. Who's your backup? Who's going to go by and check this? And the chief obviously verifies that person's an expert as well. Usually not a problem. It is formal, but if it's a very standard thing or something that gets tagged out daily during a refit, it's not a big deal. Anyway, this very simple thing can go off the rails very quickly. But first, so the second person goes ahead, the tags are hung, and then the second person goes along, and they actually go and they sign the tag. So if somebody walks up to check the tag, they say, oh, danger tag, and then they look at it, and they're like, well, who the fuck signed this, right? And they would see the two people, the person who originally hung the tag, he signs, and then the backup person goes ahead and signs, and everything's good. That's the end of the tag out process. Really, the only thing left at that point is you go and tell the chief, hey, the tags are on. We are done. We are going to do the work that we do. And that's the end of it, really, or should be. Anyway, way back when, I'm maybe 20 years old. I probably am not old enough. No, wait, I had to have been. Sorry. Yeah, I was at least 21 when this happened. I'll explain later. So anyway, I'm at least 21 years old, but not much older than that. I'm in the Navy. I am coming off of duty, which meant I was up all night. I had the mid-watch. It sucked. And usually when you're in port, the plan is get the guys who were on duty the night before out of here as quick as possible, usually before lunch. That's the plan, right? You want to get them out of there. They haven't slept. They're tired. And besides, you don't want a bunch of tired people working in a refit environment anyway. Accidents happen. So if you have anything that needs to be done, because obviously there are only so many people on board and only so many things that can happen, you give them something that is considered easy to do, and you're like, okay, well, as soon as that's done, you can go home. Okay, so my division was already kind of screwed for manpower that day, so I was given the second tag out job. They're like, hey, so-and-so over here is going to go tag out the fathometer system, because they're going to work on it. I believe, not 100%, but if I remember correctly, there were going to be divers in the water that day, and the last thing you want is a sonar ping going out while they're in the water. Bad stuff. So we needed to tag out the system so they could do that work. We weren't actually doing anything. We were just going to do the tag out process because it was our equipment. Okay. So I'm assigned this. It's a very simple thing. If I recall correctly, it's only like 2 or 3 tags total. It's a very simple thing. It's a common practice because we do have divers going into the water quite frequently. Excuse me. So this should go very quickly, you would think. But they went ahead, and there was a combination of the person who was going along to actually hang the tags is a bit of a flake. He wasn't all that great or fantastic. I already had a low opinion of him going in, so this guy I really felt was an idiot. And then on top of it, you had a duty chief who was, for lack of better terms, being an asshole. So he wanted perfection from a guy who we all knew was never going to deliver it to him. And because of the ranks, because I outranked him, you can't do a second tag on somebody who outranks you. So, for example, I was a second class at the time. A first class could not hang the tags and then me go back him up because I'm just a second class, right? You want somebody either equal to or higher. So, unfortunately, while we were both second class petty officers at the time, I was a supervisor. He was not. So I could not go get the tag hung and then have him back me up, which in hindsight would have been way faster, but unfortunately those were the rules set. So I was locked into this position. And this guy went down, and he ends up coming back, and he's like, yeah, the chief denied it. And I'm like, why would the chief deny it? And he's like, well, he doesn't understand the thing. I'm like, well, explain it to him. Anyway, he ends up going down to talk to the duty chief like 5 or 6 times over the course of several hours. And unfortunately, the duty chief is a very busy guy, especially during refit situation. So it's not like you can just go up, back, up, back, up, back. It's go down and you are back in line, because there are other people who have other things to do, and not all of them are simple tag outs. Some of these guys go down there with dozens of tags, and they're like, yeah, we've got 30 tags ready to go. And you have to explain each and every one to the duty chief to make sure nothing's missed. Like, this is a very serious process. It's a good thing we have it. I am not shitting on the tag system. But, you have to stand in line. So now it's like, okay, he would come up, I would explain it to him again. Sometimes my chief or my LPO would go ahead and get involved. We'd all explain it to him again. We're like, okay, go back down. He goes back down. The way the duty chief wants it that day is you start over from scratch. You can't just come back and like, well, here's what I screwed up last time. It's like, no, we start over. So he starts entirely over and over again every time, and every time he ends up coming back up. So, finally, I'm supposed to leave as soon as this was done. This was assigned to me at like 8 in the morning. It's now 2, 3 in the afternoon. I'm exhausted. I am very tired. I'm very pissed off because, again, I didn't have a high opinion of this guy at the time. I don't think I ever did, even when I left that boat. But he kept screwing up. I was losing time. Like, I was literally just sitting around waiting. That was the only thing I had to do that day, was sit and wait, and I couldn't help. I couldn't go with him to the thing. So the only thing I could do is explain and teach it to him as best I could so that he could go down and fail again. And it was extremely frustrating and very angry. So, anyway, here's the part that drives me up the wall. He finally gets it done. It's late in the afternoon, okay? I don't remember how late, but it's late. Okay, I should have been home hours upon hours ago. He comes in, he's like, okay, they're hung. And I say, fucking finally! Very loudly like that, right? And I run past him, I go sign the tags, I'm out of there. I go home, and I'm so frustrated and pissed, and because I'm 21, I have access to alcohol and absolutely no training on how to deal with frustration, I go ahead and commence drinking. I'm not blitzed, okay? I'm not drunk or anything. But around 8 or 9 o'clock at night, I get a phone call. It's the boat. And the boat's like, Kyle, you got to come back in. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Why do I need to come in? There's something wrong with the tags. You didn't sign one. And I'm like, oh shit. And I was like, well, I can't come back. I can't drive right now. And I'm like, oh, okay. And that was the end of it. So I knew, okay, I'm getting in trouble, whatever. Obviously no one was hurt. Nothing went wrong. They were able to fix it while I wasn't available. It worked out. So there's that. So I know I'm in trouble. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I screwed up. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, I have all the mitigating circumstances in the world. Doesn't excuse what I did. I did screw up. But, I mean, I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I'm very fucking frustrated. And I'm also hurried. I'm in a rush because my freedom from the boat for the day has been tied to this one action. So I want to get it done quickly. When it finally all comes down, they do an audit. They're like, okay. And then my weapons officer, my department head, gets involved. He drags me into the wardroom, and the wardroom's kind of used as a makeshift little talkie-talkie area when it needs to. I'm there with my chief, the asshole who couldn't get the tags hung first, and my department head. So it's the four of us in the wardroom, and he goes around, and I'm sitting there like, yeah, dude, I screwed up. My bad. I'm totally ready to own it. You know, again, I'm like, I'm not normally a screw-up. So my record's clean at this point. This was a mistake, and everyone would agree there's mitigating factors. So I'm like, okay, this is no big deal. And it wasn't, especially when my department head, the weapons officer, decides to drop the anvil on me of, well, you know, Frame, what I'm really concerned with was your language. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, you swore at Petty Officer so-and-so at this point. Now, first, I definitely had a problem with why anyone would even mention the fact that I swore. So I was a little pissed off at Petty Officer so-and-so dickhead. Whatever. What I was more amazed with was like, wait a minute. A danger tag was hung on accident. It was done incorrectly. A danger tag. Okay, that means someone's life could have been in danger had I fucked up. And you're punishing me not for that, but for my language. And he said yes. And then I got in a whole big thing because I called him a hypocrite. But anyway, that happened again to me last night. I was at my son's sporting team thing, and an injury occurs, like not my kid, but another kid is down and they're not getting up for a few minutes, right? They're fine. It was a twisted ankle that just really, really hurt badly, right? But they were down for several minutes. There's no first aid kit at all at the facility. There's nothing here. And this is a contact sport that does deal with injuries. At one point, I did have to take my kid to go get a concussion screening at the hospital. So people go to the ER several times, this is a thing. So for me, I'm just like, what do you mean there's no first aid kit? And another thing that really bothered me was I knew that there was one and it was missing. So, I'm like, where the fuck is it? Fast forward a few minutes, the coach is in my face and like, you should never use that language with me ever again. And I'm like, wait a minute. There's a kid laid out for several minutes, and you're mad at me for saying the F word. Like, there's a bigger issue right there. Like, it's staring at us. We can both see it right now. The issue was that, and I was just like, I was flabbergasted. Now, in last night's thing, I was just hot because it was just like, are you kidding me? But it was so crazy of a situation. It was just stupid nuts. The whole thing was like, wait a minute, what? You're gonna be mad at me? And I realize, now that I've slept on it, what it was is like, in reality, he was not angry that someone swore at him. He was angry that someone pointed out what a huge epic fucking failure he was. Like, he had failed in that moment. There was no first aid kit where there should have been a first aid kit. A kid was hurt, and he could do fuck all about it, and he got really mad when one of the parents is like, what the fuck, dude? But anyway, it always, like, I've seen it before. When somebody like that, and this coach in particular, it's a pufferfish effect, right? It's that person, when you hit the nail too close, like when you say something that's true, like really gets to them, and they do that, and they their chest expands and they get all big. They try to make themselves look big because, man, they're pissed, and they probably are really pissed. I mean, I don't think they're faking the anger, but it's like, I call it the pufferfish effect. I think I came up with that one on my own. I don't know. I've been using it for decades. And that's how I could tell, like, man, I really hit close to home if you're doing the pufferfish effect to me. But yeah, just the fact that happened like twice now, where there's a way bigger underlying issue, and they want to get mad with like something I consider trivial. It's like, did that really happen? Oh my goodness. Anyway, I just had to get that off my chest before we go ahead and talk about the end of the world today. And, not really the end of the world, but politics in general around here. So, hi, it's Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. And Biden has decided to set a deadline for Israel. There's my October surprise. He's got, Israel has 30 days to allow aid to go through to Palestinians in Gaza, or the U.S. will start withholding weapons. 30 days. That's a choice, isn't it? Now, remember that the previous demand was a ceasefire with Hamas and the release of hostages. Those are off the table. Apparently, we're not even going towards that anymore. We're working towards, could you please maybe improve conditions for civilians in the Gaza Strip, please? So, there's this letter. It went out, I believe, on the 13th of this month from the worst Secretary of State in American history, Antony Blinken, and asleep at the wheel, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Quote, does not explicitly reference a possible suspension of arms, end quote. So, this thing's not even, like, official in any way, like, not in a serious way, like, if you don't do this, then this will happen. It's if you don't do this, we're gonna be mad kind of a deal. It's the worst deadline I've ever heard of. And the thing is, like, most of these articles that I go ahead and I see, they all reference the 40,000 casualties number, but they always neglect to mention that the local health authority can't count anymore. So, again, a casual observer would notice 40,000 has been around for a while now and go ahead and assume that, oh, well, the killing must have dropped off significantly. It has not. It should be noted that there was an administration review, found that Israel has indeed contributed significantly to the insufficient flow of aid to Palestinians. Apparently, this is the second letter sent by the worst Secretary of State in American history, Antony Blinken. The first was sent in April, to mixed results. That one didn't have a deadline at all. It was like, hey, could you, like, stop, please? And they kinda didn't. So, mixed results, whatever. If I had to guess, I'd say this is a political calculation by the Biden administration to punt this football as far past the election as possible. They clearly recognize that this is an issue that could fuck them and screw up the entire Democratic Party here in November, so they want to kick it to a good week and a half, 2 weeks after the election, so that way the Harris is clean. And the whole reason they would even bother doing this is because the Trump campaign has been targeting Muslims in Michigan. They see the wedge, and they know they don't need to win 51% of the vote. They only need to peel away just enough support, maybe just a couple thousand votes in the entire state to swing it. Or, at the very least, make it close enough for election deniers to have something to work with when they begin challenging in courts, which we know they're going to do. Another demand in the letter is the immediate death of a bill that is working its way through the Knesset right now that would cut off all ties with UNRWA. That's the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees. They help Palestinians, so they have to ban them naturally. And that kind of leads into our next story here. The next story I wanted to talk about that isn't really getting a lot of play here in the United States media is a group called Samadoun. I'm probably mispronouncing the hell out of that, but it is spelled Samidoun. It is also known as the Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network. The U.S. and Canada imposed sanctions against this pro-Palestinian group. It describes itself as, quote, an international network of organizers and activists working to build solidarity with Palestinian prisoners in their struggle for freedom, end quote. And they say further on, quote, we work to raise awareness and provide resources about Palestinian political prisoners, their conditions, their demands, and their work for freedom for themselves, their fellow prisoners, and their homeland, end quote. This is all stemming from Germany, banned the group all the way back in November of last year, 2023. In November of last year, there were a lot of anti-genocide protests, a lot of pro-Palestinian support protests. Some participants in Germany of these pro-Palestinian marches were members of this group, and Germany claims that they were being anti-Semitic in nature, and per their laws, they have very serious laws when it comes to anti-Semitism over there. The group was banned along with Hamas and, a whole bunch of other pro-Palestinian groups. The United States and Canada have labeled the organization as a terrorist one based on ties to Hamas. Now, I have a little bit of a problem with that because, quite frankly, they're using that in a way broad brush, like, you have ties to Hamas. It's like, well, how? I'm Palestinian, for fuck's sake, right? It's like, how do you determine that? And also, every Palestinian technically has ties to Hamas in one form or another. No evidence of any of this was presented, and really this is kind of, a thing that's going on. Every pro-Palestinian group is being labeled as anti-Semitic by the pro-Israeli groups. And even American college students were labeled as anti-Semitic when they protested last spring. We'll talk about that here in a minute. So to call a pro-Palestinian group a terrorist one because they have ties to Hamas is like saying any pro-American group must also be pro-Trump because you have friends and family that voted for him, right? Like that's really all you need for a connection, and they're not really proving a deeper connection there. I mean, if your goal is to provide funding for Palestinian prisoners, and every Palestinian prisoner is called Hamas because that's what the IDF does, you're screwed, right? I mean, technically, you could be seen as aiding and abetting a terrorist group, but I disagree. I think it's a very oversimplification of what is going on, and it's also taking the IDF entirely at its word, because they arrest men, women, and children of all ages, shapes, and sizes, and just say, well, yeah, they're Hamas, so we can lock them up, we can do whatever, right? I mean, Americans did it in Abu Ghraib, and they're currently doing it down in Cuba right now, Guantanamo Bay, woohoo! So it is a very real problem that we've got going on, and it's especially concerning because they're further weaponizing the charge of anti-Semitism to silence dissent. Anything that doesn't give full-throated support to Israel is being labeled as anti-Semitic, which is kind of ironic because equating a nation with a religion is itself a form of anti-Semitism and bigotry. Because obviously, first off, no group is a monolith. But no nation is a single religion. They can call themselves that if the government wants to say, yes, we are all the same. It's like, yeah, sure you are. But for me, this speaks to a larger authoritarian bend in global politics. And though it may surprise you, a lot of it is happening right here in the United States. One key element of an authoritarian regime, if you need a definition, is the need to suppress dissent to anything that the state is doing. That is one of the key things. When it's authoritarian, it's usually single-party rule, and if you are not that party and don't toe the party line, you are an opposition. You are dissent, and they need to squash that. So a quick example is the aforementioned college campus protests. Recruiters were polled and found over 2/3 of them were wary of hiring campus protesters in the future. Multiple opinion pages across the political spectrum telling those same protesters that they're getting what they asked for, along with those same op-ed pages championing colleges who are cracking down on college protests. So you can go to any paper in the world right now and look up their op-ed, and I guarantee you there's more than one of somebody, either Democrat, Republican, right, left, doesn't matter, who are like, man, it's finally great. These college presidents are finally cracking down on the protesters. Rah. Yeah. And it's going to have an effect, because it isn't that your cause is not just, or that protesting isn't the right or wrong thing to do, but now you have to calculate. If even one idiot at the protest yells an anti-Semitic slur into a camera, the entire protest will be labeled as anti-Semitic. And now you face possible expulsion from a very expensive school you probably took on loans for, and a hostile job market when you're done with college. So, and even furthermore, we know for a fact that there are right-wing agitators going to these protests with the specific intent of mislabeling the entire group through speech or violence. You know, why would you protest right now? Why would anyone? But that's the private sector, you might say. Well, go tell that to the Atlanta Solidarity Fund. The Atlanta Solidarity Fund is a group that raises money for bail funding of protesters. Period. That's what they do. You go to jail because you were protesting, the police arrest you, you can't put up bail, so you end up sitting in prison. This is a win-win for the police, right? Even if your trial gets thrown out, even if you lose your trial, you're still in jail for months, because we all know the courts are backed up. So this works out great for them. They get to get a protester off the street, and they didn't even have to do anything. They could just not show up. You still lose several months of your life. So there's a charity group, Atlanta Solidarity Fund. They go ahead, they raise money for bail funding of protesters. Right now in Atlanta, you have an extremely controversial thing, colloquially known as Cop City. It is a massive training campus. They're going to bulldoze a whole forest for it. And it's going to be for police to come in from around the country to train how to kick down doors and murder civilians. Yes, the police say it's necessary for morale. It is. Anyway, there are a lot of protesters protesting that. The police obviously arrest them, and the charity provides resources so these people can get out on bail rather than just rot in a jail cell. Georgia has charged them with money laundering and racketeering. To be fair, the money laundering charge was dropped in September, so they're no longer facing that, but racketeering is still there. This is the first time a state RICO law has ever been used against protesters or civil unrest. Okay, RICO was designed to go after organized crime. So by charging a charity with this law, you're kind of implying that the group is akin to the mafia, for fuck's sake. So, and again, whether this case succeeds or fails is not relevant to the bigger picture. Since the group's indictment, banks obviously refuse to work with them. Online financial resources that charities use to collect money won't work with them. No one else wants to be caught up in working with organized crime. And obviously the group, because their assets have been frozen, is not able to provide resources to political prisoners during this entire sham trial, and it is a sham. The Deputy Attorney General, John Fowler's integrity is already being a focal point of the whole thing, and it hasn't even really started yet. So that tells you how bad it is. First off, the indictment doesn't actually list any of the racketeering acts and what they were. Usually there's like, on this date, this person did this thing, and that's supposed to be, you know, part of the indictment. It doesn't have anything. It doesn't say what these people actually did. They're just being charged with racketeering. Ta-da! So, you have that. Then Fowler totally did some shady shit. He obtained emails between the defendants and the lawyers and handed them over to the police for investigation. He is also denying in court in Atlanta they use an app called Signal. This is an encrypted third-party message app for police to hide messages that they don't want in court. Now, obviously, the judge could go ahead and order those messages be turned over, assuming they're still there. But the fact that he is fighting this at all, it should be criminal, right? The whole point of going to trial is that all the evidence... I mean, how many times in any movie or lawyer TV show where it's like, the prosecution didn't turn over everything, or they hid evidence, and the whole case gets blown up? Like, this is a big thing in the cultural lexicon of the United States, and yet for some reason, this guy's fighting it tooth and nail. And again, the entire point of this, and the labeling of pro-Palestinian groups as terrorists, is to silence dissent. If you're smart, and you live in Gaza, Lebanon, or the United States, you should consider what going to a protest will mean.
We must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence.
Okay, so as you just heard there, Trump is off his meds again. There's a video of the president calling for video games to be banned if they're too violent. No mention of whom would be deciding how violent is too violent or any other details. Some see this as his way of trying to deflect from school shootings, placing the blame firmly, onto the culture, which the president legislatively can't really do fuck all about. I see it a little differently. This was the original argument, along with like Marilyn Manson and rap music in the 90s. When school shootings first started happening, you had Columbine, and the media played a huge part of the right's blame game. They did not want to blame the guns. They didn't want to blame anything. It was just like they're watching these horrific movies and they're listening to this horrible music and they're playing these deadly video games, because I think Doom was popular back then or something. But for Trump to go after video games now just further demonstrates his brain is incapable of learning new things. Like, he heard this once and it stuck with him. Because it's highly unlikely he has ever played a modern video game. I mean, there might be something of him all the way back in the late 70s, early 80s playing Pong or maybe Pac-Man, but like, he hasn't played a modern thing. He's not out there playing Gears of War or anything. I have no doubt his kids likely never did as well. I don't think he has any connection to the media at all. Now, I was thinking, in light of this, if I was the owner, operator of the Grand Theft Auto or some other hyper-violent franchise, I would publicly open talks with the Trump campaign about creating a Trump avatar. Get one of those, totally muscle-bound, stoked digital versions of him that you can find everywhere, because the right can't just appreciate the guy for who he is. He's got to also be really buff and swole, and, have him in the video game as Buff Trump, Rambo Trump, if you want, with an AR-15, shooting whoever. Just you could play as the Trump avatar and go blow everything away, and then say, oh well, anybody who purchases this add-on, the funding will go to the Trump campaign, and we're paying you for your likeness, of course. Because I think immediately Trump would immediately change his tune and be like, oh no, video games are great. I mean, we've seen this before. He was against TikTok until he owned stock in TikTok, and now all of a sudden he's like, we should not ban TikTok. And it's like, okay, I agree with you, but your intent is not, no, we should not. So I would do that and then back out at the last minute and just make it all public about how, everything is. Because it just goes to further demonstrate how easy it is to manipulate this man by stroking his ego and patting his wallet, right? Because it's almost 100% certain if the Orange God King would switch gears. He absolutely would. Sadly, I don't think the larger franchises would touch this idea. They're large franchises. They have a lot to lose. Like, I get it, right? There's too much at stake. Maybe a smaller outfit could pull it off, though. But like, man, it's just having me sit here like, where is the left-wing Project Veritas when you need one? Okay, thank you again for listening. Sorry about my really long, stupid story at the beginning about swearing at work and what kind of trouble it gets you into. Yeah, sometimes you just gotta get things off your chest. Anyway, hope you enjoyed today's show. I think I'm going to stick with the audio format for now. I know that isn't great for YouTube listening. I apologize, but there are plenty of other podcasts that don't have anything on YouTube, and they actually do significantly better than me. So I don't think it's that. But anyway, thank you very much. Remember again to like, share, and subscribe as normal. I do not accept donations. I am not monetized in any way. If you see ads at all during any of this, it's not me, and I'm not seeing any of it. Period. So most of the software I use is free to use. I'm not trained in any way how to use this stuff. So if it doesn't sound up to snuff or anything like that, this is a one-man show, and I do all of it. So, keep that in mind when you come at me with your comments. But, anyway, if you don't like, share, and subscribe, there's no way that the channel can grow and everything. Also, feel free to email me, recoveryfrompolitics@gmail.com. I will read it live on the air and answer any questions you have. Thank you very much for listening. Please be safe. Get vaccinated. We'll see you next time.